So I'll just, as a way of introduction, thank you, Julianne, for agreeing to have this conversation. And as we were just preparing to start recording, you were saying about how, could you say it in your own language, that how you went to
Yeah.
the USM?
Yeah, so I came across the principles via USM. So I went to the University of Santa Monica, which is a master's program in spiritual psychology. And then I did their coaching program, which Steve Chandler was a part of. He was on the faculty for that program. And he introduced a video of Dick and Bettinger within that program that my husband saw. And then he told me about the principles. And then some other people from USM started sharing what they saw from the principles. And then at that point, it was like this really natural transition to learn about the principles and see, from my perspective, it's like I saw something much deeper when I started listening in that way. And then now I would say, which is 8 years later, I really love bringing everything I've seen from wherever I've seen it from to the table. So I think that the truth can be pointed to 1,000 different ways. And if it's all pointing to the truth, then that's good in my book. And so I just like to, if somebody's really struggling and they aren't able to see something from just listening, from a principles-based conversation, I might bring in some of what I learned from USM to kind of help them open up. And then that conversation becomes a lot more easier from there. So,
Mm.
yeah. So Steve Chandler was a big part of a
He
lot
was
of
the,
people coming to principles. Yeah.
yeah, the gateway into the principles. And
Yes.
what shifted very personally when what was your entry point in the principles after people started talking about it? What was the first thing that impacted you personally?
Well, the first impact I noticed was I was in the coaching program at USM. So, and they do point quite differently. They're pointing to something very similar, but they're pointing very, very differently, USM from what Sid was pointing to. And so, and I used to work at USM. So I was very much in the culture of USM, both as a student and as an employee. Um, and at this point, I was no longer working there, but I came back to class and I was sharing, and they have these large group shares, right? So you stand up in front of, in the coaching program, maybe it was like 60 people. In the class for the master's program, it might have been 200, 250 people, and you stand up and share really vulnerable things. And so I stood up in the coaching program and I shared, and I noticed I was sharing much more freely. And my professor um, said to me when I came up to him, he said, uh like something like, what happened to you? You're so different. Like, when did you become so lighthearted or something like that? And um I just remember thinking to myself, like, it was like a shock that he said it to me because I didn't see that difference fully. And then when I reflected on it, I was like, oh, when I stopped taking my thinking so seriously. And I would say one of the shadows of something like, an approach like USM is you can like take it all very seriously sometimes. And so the principles really helped me to just to take it all a lot less seriously. And the fact that he was noticing it in my behavior, just kind of shocked me because it was really effortless for that to happen. It's just, I really did have insights about the fact that I didn't need to take it seriously. And then all of a sudden, someone who I really respect and admire is telling me they saw such a difference in me. So that was the first time I realized, like, oh, this really has done something to me that maybe I'm not aware of.
Hmm. That's interesting. So for you, for many people, I think it's a sense of an insight that they've seen something and they feel different from moment to moment. There's this clear delineation, but for you, it was more of a like somebody reflecting back at you that they see you differently, and you looking back and realizing that, oh, something changed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely had moments of insight but that was like one of the first moments that it just all kind of clicked. It was almost like my brain fritzed and I was like, oh, like something's very different now that I didn't know. So it stood out to me as a moment to like pay attention to.
Hmm. And how did your relationship with thinking change since then?
It's a good question. It just I honestly always say it just reminded me of what I always knew. And there were parts of it that I didn't know how to grapple with, like parts of being in thought that I didn't know how to grapple with. But I have this really clear memory. I have so many different memories where it's like when I have an insight, it just reminds me of this memory where I knew it already as a kid. And one of the memories I have was I must have like broken, I was like 14 and I must have broken up with a boyfriend and was like really sad about it. That's my guess as to what precipitated this. Um, and I was laying there imagining myself being like a damsel in distress because I was really like sad about the breakup. And so I like pictured myself being in distress and like him coming and saving me. And I remember thinking to myself, this isn't healthy. Like, this isn't healthy to buy into this thought or to let this thought be the one that comforts me. It's like I was using it as a like to comfort me. And I
Mm.
realized like that's not a healthy way to see myself, that I need to be saved or that I need to be in distress in order to feel connection. Like I just could feel it as I was doing it. I did it anyway. I
Mhm.
imagined it anyway. Um, and so maybe that's the part that I had a little bit of a harder time with was like I knew something wasn't good for me, but sometimes I was thinking about myself that way anyway. And so now I would say it's just much more easy for me. I still get lost in thought for sure, obviously, but it's just much easier for me to see that it's always been made of thought and that the truth of who we are is much deeper than that. And it doesn't feel constricted in that way. Like the truth of who we are doesn't feel constricted like that.
Yeah. And when people ask, so for example, somebody maybe they've seen something for themselves and then they have a conversation with you, and or maybe they heard this expression that everything is made of thought, or we feel our thinking, and but they really don't get it. So they come to you and they ask, what do you mean? Like, what do these people mean when they say like we live in our thinking? There are outside circumstances, they make me feel a certain way. Like, what does it mean?
Mm.
How would you answer? How would you help them to see that maybe for themselves?
I mean, probably so many different ways. Like, I'm always listening to where someone's asking that question from and what might be getting in the way. So sometimes I ask follow-up questions to really hear what they see or don't see, or how they see themselves. But one of the things recently I find myself doing more is like I'll talk about a baby because my son is only 2, so I have just such a clear reference point of he's not carrying around any thoughts about himself.
Mhm.
He's just fresh and wide-eyed, and that's how we were all born. And so it can only ever be that we picked it up through personal thinking over time and that it's a misunderstanding. Because if you look at a baby, they don't have any of that going on.
Mhm.
So, like, that might be one of 1,000 ways in which I can point to something and someone be like, oh, yeah, that's so true. Like, I didn't used to think this about myself and now I do. So clearly it can't be truth. So just sometimes like little ways of like pointing to it in a way that like almost punctures something and then they can see something a little bit bigger from there.
Mhm.
Uh, but I would say mostly what I'm doing is really, really listening. Like I've gotten much better at just listening to what they're saying and hearing how it looks to them so I can kind of help them see something fresh about it. Like I just had a conversation with someone and she's like working so hard in her career and she's gotten really, really far and has created all this incredible opportunity for herself, but she's always last on the list,
Mhm.
right? So it's like I want to understand a little bit more about something like that. Why are you last on the list? When did that even start? Um, and just to help them start to like almost zoom out from it.
Mhm.
And then when they zoom out from it, they could see that it's not who they are. Um, so yeah, that would just be an example of it.
Mhm. I think pointing out to children is such a great way because everybody, I think, can relate, either seeing small children or having children and having seeing how really free they are, how
Yeah.
unconcerned they are, how
Yeah.
playful and yeah,
Yeah. And that
fun.
they just don't have a lot of self-concept, you know, they don't have a lot of concepts about themselves. They're
Yeah.
just, you know, especially a baby like has no concepts about themselves. They're just there and um like bright, and they'll move through emotions, and none of that means anything to them, you
Mm.
know? So just watching that is like such a good teacher, I think, for us to remember what's really going on, you know?
Mm. What if somebody said, and maybe it happened to you, that somebody said, well, it's good for babies or small children because they don't have responsibilities. But I really have to think about things. I really have to be, doing things I sometimes don't want to do, be stressed about it, sometimes overthink, overstress, and because it's part of life, it's part of my responsibilities. How how could that person see that maybe it's not really helpful or it's not necessary to live a good life?
Well, it's interesting. It reminds me of something Linda Pransky, who shares the principles, obviously, for those who know that world. She was one of Sydney Banks' mentees, and I did a demo with her years ago. And this was like my first entrance into the principles. And she tried everything with me to help me see. I was asking about anxiety, I think, and she tried everything. She said everything. And I was like really trying to hear her, but something wasn't like landing. And then at the very end, she said, if I could help you have any insight, I would want to help you see that your thinking isn't helping you. And I reflected on that for the next few days. And I was like, oh, shoot, it isn't helping me. It's making me more stressed. So I had to like step back and look for myself. Um, so again, there's sometimes I'll even say what Linda said to me because it was so helpful. And I'll see someone really thinks it's helpful to overthink and get super stressed. So I may say something like that if I'm trying to just like put a first puncture in.
Mhm.
Um, but like I said before, like I'm really listening to them on a deep level. So lots of different things occur to me to do. But the main thing, you know, kind of in all of it, I would say is probably just that sense of being able to step back and really even think of times where they handled things well, but they weren't stressed, or they handled things well and they weren't overthinking. Um, you know, and like, or even looking at people in their life that are handling things well, but don't seem as stressed as they are, right? Like starting to look for proof that that's not the only way,
Mm.
you know. I think that can be helpful because if we've been swimming in it for so long, we really only see what we see about it. So it kind of takes you know, peeking our head up and seeing if we see something else, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's maybe similar also looking at small children or babies and comparing to somebody who's having less stress is like seeing a different way of living that reminds of us that we're not stuck in our reality and that there are other ways of being
Yeah.
available.
Yeah, and even joy. I love to point to joy more and more. Even for myself, I always have insights about how joy is really powerful, you know, and it brings us back to our own creativity, our own senses. And so when people can think of times where they were just really enjoying themselves and there was a lot of flow in their life, that's also a really cool way to help someone um, kind of like peek from behind the blinders and see
Mm.
something fresh about what's possible, especially because they've already experienced it, right? It's like we've all experienced what we're pointing to. It's just we sometimes forget.
Yeah, I think it's so maybe also the culture has something to do with it because it's often expected that things come from hard work, from stress, from struggle, from overwhelm, and it's what has to happen. So joy may be good for the babies, for small children. Some people may say, but I really need to struggle to make things happen, and that's not true.
Yeah, and I love pointing to conditioning, especially when people can start to see what we're talking about. I love pointing to conditioning because it's just like, again, my son did not come in thinking it needed to be hard, right? He
Yeah.
doesn't have that. So it's like it's just getting installed on our computer.
Mm.
and we can have a totally different reality. I remember when I was like 18, I moved to Arizona from New Jersey, and I was completely culture shocked because in the United States, New Jersey is very different than Phoenix, Arizona. And I like could not understand people's behavior. And I had two roommates I had moved with from New Jersey. So I'd be like, why are people doing this? Or how come they do this? Or one of them was I thought people were talking behind our backs all the time because in New Jersey, they just tend to be very direct. And in Phoenix, they were so lovely. And I was like, are they like waiting to say it until they leave?
Mm.
Um, and my friend came home that I moved with one day and she said, I know what you are. And I was like, what am I? And she's like, a sociologist. And so I went to school after that to study sociology because I wanted to understand why different cultures created such different behaviors and different ways of seeing life. And I mean, it's just all made of thought, right? That's just all a way of creating the world in which we live, but it doesn't have to be the only way, you know?
Mm.
So I feel like I've just been interested in that pretty much my whole life because I would see what was going on in the world and be like, this doesn't make sense to me, you know?
Mm.
I don't understand this. I don't understand why people are behaving this way
Mm.
towards each other specifically.
There's something you said that was interesting that actually sparked the idea for this conversation. That you said that all my life, when you were describing this, the feedback a client gave you, you said, all my life I wanted to help people feel loved and understood. And I was wondering, when did you first discover that you wanted to do that? How did it happen?
Um, I just always felt that way. I think I probably also felt misunderstood, maybe, but I wouldn't say that's where it came from. I just really like for example, when I was maybe like 7 or 8, I watched a movie that was for adults. I probably shouldn't have watched it, but the theme of the movie was the meaning of life. And I went up to my mom and I was like, Mom, why do people not know what the meaning of life is when the meaning of life is love? And my mom said, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I just this to me, Yakov, was like the most craziest thing. I walked away and without a hesitation in anything, I was like, why does my mom not know that the meaning of life is love? I don't understand that. Like, why does she not know that? I was clear that I was saying something that was true,
Mhm.
that she had a misunderstanding. Like, that's how certain I was.
Mm.
Um, and then my friend group, like, even as early as like middle school, if my friends would get into arguments, like I just remember one time they came to me to like mediate it. And it was like four people arguing, and I like got in the middle and helped facilitate something that healed the relationship.
Mm.
So I just honestly always felt like that's who I am, you know, like that's what I'm meant to do. Or I don't know. I don't think I thought that's what I meant to do. It was the only thing that occurred to me to do, you know?
Mm.
So it was just very natural, I would say. And I think some people are probably obviously more inclined like that. Um, but I do think I really truly believe that everything is made from love, and the further away we get from that, the harder things are.
Mm. Did you ever lose that maybe in the teens? Because I think we have convictions, we have something that we as children we live by, but then the society again, the conditioning, the people around us,
Yeah.
when teens are so vulnerable to their influence, so sometimes we just pretend to not believe in that anymore or get influenced by somebody else. Or did you always held it close to yourself?
I would say it never went far away, you know, like I've always had it to some degree, but I would say what you're saying is true. Like the more I got lost in insecurity, the further it felt, you know,
Mm.
and the more it looked like I was supposed to be some other version of myself. That's why I think every time I had an insight from the principles, it's like I already knew this. Like it's like just kind of like clearing something from, you know, my view and then reminding me like, oh yeah, like that was this, you know. I remember even like I was making coaching so hard And then I was in a workshop and I think Bill Pettit was there. Yeah, he was there. And I was like, oh my God, I did this as a waitress. Like I literally used to, for 8 years, I waitress through school and people would come in a low mood. I wouldn't have called it a low mood. I just felt like they're grumpy.
Mm,
Um, and I would just play around with loving them in whatever way made sense. And the game that I was playing was, will they leave in a better mood?
mm,
And I would say 95% of the time, if not more, they left in a better mood than when they came in. And they may not have even noticed it, like they may not have noticed anything changed. But I could see it from like how they were when they came in to how they were when they left.
mm,
And so, like what you just said, it's like when I bought into insecurities, it's like, oh, coaching's so hard. I don't know if I can do this, I don't know if I'm good enough. Um, Whatever. And then having that clear and being like, oh my God, I did this as a waitress. Like I did this before anyone showed me this. You know what I mean? Before anyone
mm,
pointed to this. So I just think it's really cool to see how natural it is to us as humans. Like that's one of the most exciting things to me. It's like we're not adding anything to ourselves, we're just
mm,
subtracting misunderstandings.
mm. Yeah, I love this idea. So often we try to add something. Yeah, we believe we're missing some information or some skills or something that we need to build on top of ourselves. When actually we need to come back to ourselves and, like you said, subtract what doesn't really belong, what we picked up from the society, from the surroundings, and just
Yeah, and that will always be the case. To me, that will always be the case in human form. Like, I don't imagine there's going to be an end to misunderstandings that I have while I'm alive. But I get it's easier to see them. It's easier to not take them so seriously. It's easier to wake up from them. It's easier to go about my life in a different way. And to get out of my way and create whatever it is my heart wants to create, and that to me is really exciting.
hmm, yeah. One point I was thinking that there will be a point when thinking will stop completely, and that's the nature of enlightenment. That's the place to get to. And then I realized, I mean, talking, listening to people who are, in my opinion, enlightened, like Ajay Shanti, he said that it never stops. What happens is that it gets shorter. The thought recognition happens faster, so it doesn't pull you
Yeah.
as for as long as before.
That's been my experience too, for sure. That
Mm, mm,
that's like a powerful thing to realize, right? Because when it looked to me like I was gonna get rid of all of it, like I was gonna sweep it all up,
yeah.
and like
Mm,
push it out the door, that was actually really painful and created a lot more insecurity because it meant that there was something wrong with having that experience.
mm,
Um, so what you just said from Adyashanti, I think is very powerful because it frees us up to still be human, to still have a human experience, but to navigate it differently,
mm,
relate to it differently.
yeah. Mm. I ask you a question. I'm curious. It's a bit of like taking a different turn from here, but what would you say? Because I was interested in this for a long time. Like, what would you say? Is there one thing that holds people back from living their authentic life, full life in whatever way? What would you say that is, the way you see it?
Um, like getting lost in fear and not realizing like the power of their own inspiration, love, um, like that learning curve, I would say makes all the difference in someone's life.
Hmm. And what is that fear of?
Just fear, right? Like getting lost in the content that comes up from fear, right? So our systems are designed to experience fear. That was something else that really, really helped me because I thought I wasn't supposed to feel as afraid as I did.
Hmm.
And I didn't realize that I could just relate to it differently and I didn't have to take the content of the fear so seriously. right? So it's almost like I would get afraid and then all this content, all this thinking would come in and I would try to like battle all of it, you know? And then I just started to realize like, oh, I'm designed to feel afraid and I can relate to that differently. And that learning curve of being with fear in a different way is really, really powerful. And one I just wish we learned from a much younger age, you know, for human society. I think we'd live in a very different world if we learned that younger and people had a deeper grasp on how to relate to fear. Because again, like I've seen people think they're going to not have fear or that fear is bad or that they shouldn't have it or whatever version people have of that.
Hmm.
And then it's like how the joke I make recently is like, well, we have a nervous system and it's called nervous system.
Yeah,
Like
that's a good one.
we are designed to feel fear. It is not, we're not going to get out of this life without feeling it. And if we can just understand what it's telling us and relate to it differently, then we'll have a completely different experience of it. And it won't look so personal, right? Like when I didn't understand that, it looked very personal to me that I was feeling fear. Like, oh, that's something wrong with Julie that she's
Hmm.
feeling so much fear, you know? And then I zoomed out and I was like, oh no, we are all designed to feel fear. There's no problem in that, but there is a learning curve, and that learning curve is really helpful to, you know, relating to it all very differently.
Yeah, I think maybe one other version of that of fear is people believe that at one point they will be ready for something. They will feel confident to do something. They will be ready. There will be no fear. There will be no obstacles anymore. And that waiting it can be a lifetime of waiting because it's the fear is not gonna go away. The confidence is not gonna appear. And it leads to waiting and waiting and waiting. And like you said, if we knew that fear is normal and if we knew that we don't have to feel a certain way before doing what we want to do, it would be so much easier to
Yeah,
just do it.
especially that we don't have to not have fear to follow, like, you know, just to say it really simply, to follow our heart, like to
Mhm.
follow a passion, to follow inspiration, to follow what feels like a yes to us, right? Because if you're waiting to never feel fear to do that, then you're actually giving fear all this power that it doesn't really have. And I'm really sensitive. There are some people who it'll be good for them to learn how to regulate emotionally before they start, you know, trying to make big changes in their life because that learning curve will help them feel more stable as they go and do things outside their comfort zone. But that's why the learning curve is so powerful, right? Is it can give someone the capacity to go outside their comfort zone without getting so destabilized by it, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting that people instead of pushing themselves harder to get rid of fear or to push themselves against the fear, they actually need to learn like almost like rise above the fear and learn that it's okay to feel fear and to just have a different relationship with it and actions will follow as a natural result of that then.
Yeah, and embracing it, right? Like embracing that we feel fear is very different than wishing we didn't. Now, I
Hmm.
still wish I don't feel fear. I still have a hard time with fear at times. So it's like, again, it's a spectrum of I just so much less of the time now.
Hmm.
But you know, in the embracing of it, then we can hear whatever wisdom we need to hear, right? But in the rejecting of it, to me, what I found was I was like disconnecting from myself, right? In the embracing of my experience, then I'm still present. I'm still able to hear whatever wisdom is available for me. And I've learned lots of different things from fear,
Hmm.
lots of different things. There's not one thing I've learned from fear, there's lots of different things I've learned from it.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's just like, you know, like before I go on a webinar where I'm, you know, going to be speaking to however many people and I feel nervous ahead of time, right? Like, okay, there's one version of it where I just embrace that that's what happens and then I go and do it anyway. But
Hmm.
other times I'm like, no, I need to honor that my body feels so dysregulated that I would actually prefer to slow something down, right? And I can take care of myself in that and I can let myself learn what's going on and, you know, let something unfold from there. So I don't like to paint it that it's like you embrace your fear and then you do it anyway, because that
Mhm.
really actually got in my way for a long time. Like I kept pushing myself past my own um like nervous system capacity, maybe is the easiest way to say it. It's like I
Mhm.
kept myself really dysregulated by doing that, you know?
And there's gentleness to the second approach where you allow yourself to slow down rather than just pushing yourself through it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Big time. Big time. And the world is going so fast. It's like if we slow down, we'll learn what we need to, you know?
Yeah, which is I think is a very difficult concept for many people to really. I remember reading the Steve Chandler's The Prosperous Coach, and there was this phrase "slow down to speed up," and I really for a long time I couldn't really get it. I mean, I thought that I got it intellectually that you slow down so that you could think better, come up with better ideas, but really what he was pointing at, I think, is to slow down the thinking so that
Mhm.
you'll have a completely different experience. And I think it's very counterintuitive for many people. Like, what do you mean I slow down? Like, I want to speed up. I don't want to slow down. Uh, and I think maybe it's in trying that people realize that, yeah, how it actually works and what it makes them, how it makes them feel, and what results it produces.
Yeah, I mean, there's two examples I find myself doing a lot recently. One is, and not that we all have this time, so I understand the time and what I'm about to say is not available for everybody, but it still points to something.
Mm.
So when I was teaching, I would have the summers off. I taught in a situation where the kids were really up against a lot. So it and I was young and I just had a huge learning curve as a teacher. So by the end of the year, I was kind of like, "Oh my God," like crawling to the finish line. And then summer would come and I would have, 2 months to just unwind and relax my whole body. And it didn't take long. It was maybe 3 weeks into that my creativity went crazy and I had to start planning for the next year. And before the next year started, I had like so much of the next year planned before I even got back because it was just like, my creativity was just off the charts because I was so relaxed.
Mhm.
Uh, but what I do often, because not everybody has that kind of time, but what I do point to is like, if all we saw is that when our nervous system is more regulated, that our creativity, our inspiration, the clarity of thought goes up, then that would be enough for people to actually want to look in that direction and to, get regulated more of the time.
Mhm.
Especially people who are going really, really fast and maybe have achievement as like their carrot, that they're following. Um, at some point they'll be able to see that being dysregulated that frequently for that long is not healthy for them for the long run, and that'll be something that they want us like that's the change they want to make is they want to
Mhm.
feel healthier in their own bodies. Um, so that's to me an in too is like I don't have to talk about it as thought. I can talk about the impact it's having on the body.
Mhm. Yes, I think many people recognize that having less on their mind makes them feel better. They remember
Yes.
vacations, they remember being in nature, how good they felt. But often we or they overlook it, and they think that it must have been because I was on vacation or in nature, but not because of there's just their thinking slowed down.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting.
And then to be able to see that that's on offer more of the time, then it's like, oh, honestly, for a lot of people, for some people, it takes, maybe more time, but for a lot of people, it's like they really do feel the common sense in it pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, it's just more like, okay, well, then what does it mean to look in that direction? What does that mean for my life, for how I show up, for, whatever. And then from there, it's like just a conversation helping them.
Yeah. Because it may be that even when a person wants to slow down, they just don't know how to. They never really had experience with that because if they try to slow down voluntarily, it's like they're only speeding themselves up by doing that, right? So there must be, like, if you think about falling asleep, how quickly you need to fall asleep, it's not going to help to fall asleep. And the same with slowing down. So I think it's when they realize maybe that some of the things you've been talking about and the principles point towards, when they realize that they don't have to have that carrot dangling in front of them to feel good, that
Yeah.
helps to realize, like, oh, okay, then I don't have to run so fast.
1,000%. I mean, that's a huge shift, right? And I think what I love about where I see it now is like it is common sense, right? Like if you started to look at the body and the mind and you realize it's running on overdrive,
Mhm.
most people would know that that's probably not the best approach. Like that's not going to make them feel good at the end of the day,
Mhm.
and it won't be good for them in the long term, right? So I just love how practical it is, like how obvious it is when you really slow down to see the impact going too fast has on us as humans. Um, Not everyone can see it, obviously, but most people, I think, can really see, yeah, like, oh yeah, that wouldn't make sense for the long run.
Mhm.
And then, as you said, it would be about learning how to unwind, how to slow down, how to come out of thought, how to be more present. Um, and how that has very big implications for their life. Those connecting the dots there, I think, is really helpful.
Mhm. I think it's also maybe that people don't realize they have a choice. Like they have another mode of being that's natural, that was natural for them when they were children, that's natural for children. And it's
Mhm.
not something that finishes when we go to school, but it's something that we cover by our analytical thinking that we get used to.
Yeah.
So when they know that now they have two choices, it's kind of easier to slow down that overthinking part of their mind and to come to something that's slower and deeper rather
Yeah.
than when they think, yeah.
I love what you just said about choice, to even see that there's a choice.
Hmm.
I mean, that alone is very powerful.
Yeah, because when you don't have a choice, right? What can you do? You can just run faster or slower, but you still have to run.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, it's even in realizing that there is a choice that a lot can open up for somebody. That's why I like also connecting this. Like one of the things you had asked me when we were like talking about doing this was something about like what really changes someone's life. I don't know how you asked it, but that's how I interpreted it.
Mhm.
And coming back to themselves is one way of saying it, coming like waking up. So the other thing at USM that really stunned me, I feel like you're gonna love this because I get a sense that you would be like, oh, there's 250 people sharing in a room really vulnerably. And up until that point, I was the only one that I knew that would share like that or had feelings like that, because nobody was talking about it.
Mhm.
And after listening to 250 people for the course of the first year, I was like, why do people feel so unworthy?
Mm.
Why do they feel unworthy of love? Why is that like an epidemic? And that I would say if people could wake up from that, everyone's life would change. There is no doubt that that shifting would shift someone's life for the better because it's what's creating all the problems to begin with. To think we're unworthy of love, that creates a lot of unnecessary behaviors, challenges, limitations in what we can see. Um, it really stunts our creativity, our natural inspiration. There's a lot of impacts to thinking we're unworthy of love. And the fact that it's like some kind of human epidemic is still boggles my mind.
Mm. Yeah, it's so clear when you look at it that all the things, many things people do then become ways to find that love or to ensure that love, um, to secure it.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a lot of struggle, a lot of work to do that. And still it never lasts because things change, things, you know, uh, things go away, and then it becomes there's a lot of stress about it. Like if I need to do X in order to be loved, then X becomes really important. And if I lose that X, then it's like, what do I do? And I love
Totally.
that metaphor, I think, from Michael Neal's book, that we are like a diamond covered in nail polish. So we try to like try to beautify ourselves, not knowing that in our essence we're already beautiful and complete, and we don't need to do all that.
Mhm. Yeah, and that only personal thinking can do that, meaning only a brain can create that, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not, life is not seeing us that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Life does, that's, I mean, to me, that was really helpful. Like, oh, life, this is not inherently objective, meaning it's not inherently true, the thoughts that my brain has come up with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then to realize like the diamond, like you said, it's like it's already there. It's already here. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't get broken. It doesn't, we don't lose it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to find it or fix something to get it back. That I think is really a really subtle thing to see, but the most powerful thing to see, you know, because even
Mm-hmm.
with something like USM, the misunderstanding I had was I needed to do something to get back to myself. And that's why the principles were so powerful for me, because I started to see, oh, that has been completely made up.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and you know, just knowing that people seeing that we could never not be worthy of love, that doesn't make any sense. The more we see that, the more insights we have in that direction, the more things shift and change. And that's why it's like if I had to, I play poker, so I like poker metaphors. Like I would put every single last chip I have in on realizing that, you
Mm-hmm.
know, in terms of like if I want an easier, healthier, more fulfilling life, like put all my chips in on that, and that will happen as a result of seeing that more clearly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. And I think not many people stop to think about that because it's so deeply ingrained that you need certain things in order to have certain experiences. Like you need to have more money to have more security, you need to have better house or better car or better whatever to be more liked. And it's just like it feels like it's a part of the fabric of our life, but it's not. Yeah.
It's not at all. Like that's the thing to realize. That's why I would put all my chips in on that. I really like going to the root of it, right? Like what is making this person's life more difficult for them? And if you start to see when people feel unworthy, it creates a lot of issues. Um, Really is just giving them feedback as to the quality of their thinking, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
just that's all it's doing. Um, but to clean that up, then you can see through much clearer glasses, make, you know, healthier decisions, you know, have more healthy relationships in your life. Like it just has no end to the implications of what's possible from there. So that to me is like the heart of it, you know.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what do you do personally when you have a bad day or a hard time emotionally? Is there something you that helps you to have a more graceful time with it until it changes?
Yeah, I love this question because it's so practical. I love this
Yeah.
question so much. So there's lots of different things I do. And when I first came into the principles, I started looking in this direction. But one of the things I really needed to see was that I had a lot of unconscious beliefs in the way of giving myself what I needed, right? So we all need human connection. That's how we're designed. So I used to think I needed to just do it by myself, like, you
Mm,
know? And so now sometimes I realize, like, oh, I really need a hug. Like, I'm gonna go ask my husband if he can give me a hug and like watch my body relax when he gives me a hug. So that might be something I do. Or if it's lighter and I really just, you know, can show up for myself and feel good in that, I'm a lot more often I welcome whatever's happening, right? So instead of like wishing it was different, getting freaked out by it, I just welcome it and like allow myself to feel. And I would say that's another like going to the heart of it. Like most humans on the planet, I would say, I could be wrong, but I would say most humans on the planet don't really know how to feel the difficult stuff. And so then that's what also creates a lot of challenges. So like being able to just feel things that feel tricky or difficult and not buying into the stories as much as to what I think that means about me or what the story is telling me about myself.
Mhm.
That really makes a difference for me if I'm having a hard day, for sure. But there's lots of different things, and I really, especially for women in my world, when women don't pay attention to their own needs, I'll look there with them because it's okay to have needs and it's okay to like listen to them and get and give ourselves what we need. So
Mhm.
like for me, the example I gave you was like, of course I can go ask my husband for a hug and like it's okay that I need that. Would be an example of like looking in a direction that isn't maybe like how do I say this? Like seems like why is that such a big deal?
Yeah.
But it's like, but that's the unwinding of those misunderstandings, right? Like that's the slowing down and really seeing something else
Mhm.
that's possible on offer. Um, and like I was recently leading a group where one of the women hadn't listened, like honestly, doesn't seem like she's listened to her own needs in 15 years
Mhm.
because she's a teacher and a mom. And that was her words. Like, I haven't looked at that in about 15 years. And I was like, oh yeah, that's going to cause a lot of problems, right? Because you'll be depleted. Like at some point you'll get depleted and you won't have a lot of space for creativity or rejuvenation or, you
Mhm.
know? So yeah, I have certain things I kind of keep my eyes on and people listening to their needs is one of them.
Mhm. Yeah, I love what you said there. It doesn't have to be complicated. Often people look for something that's really complicated, but it can be as simple as having a hug.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the insight that like, you know, little insights like that you and I have had along this journey of like, oh yeah, everyone has a low mood and it doesn't mean so much and it'll pass.
Yeah.
And then other insights for me of like our system is dysregulated and we can co-regulate, right? Like we can get regulated together.
Mhm.
Um, all of those insights made it so much less like tricky,
Mhm.
you know, and just more obvious. Like, oh yeah, of course that's what I would need right now.
Yeah, because that's I think the key is to remember in the moment because when we're calm, we can remember it better. But when we're in the midst of an emotional turmoil, it's kind of difficult to remember that it will pass because it feels like it will not,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And the more I got like really clear on, oh, this is what it feels like to be dysregulated or destabilized, then the more obvious it became that I would just do whatever made sense to me to stabilize again.
I'm conscious of the time, Julie. It was such a great conversation.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing your experience and really pointing different ways that people could be reminded of this truth because I think everybody, like you say, everybody knows it's on a deep level because that's what is common to all of us, right? Since we're born, but it gets covered and we need to be reminded of it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I really love your spirit and the way in which you relate to people. I think it's very healthy, and I always felt like from the few interactions we've had prior to now, I've always felt like you have a deep respect for other human beings, and that's one of my favorite things. So
Mm.
I love connecting with people like you. It's on the top of my list of things to do every day.
Mm. Thank you, Jude. Thank you for your acknowledgement. And I love how you said like the sense of love that you feel towards humans. Like in several posts you said I love humans. I have loved humans. I will always love humans. Like it's so felt that you really that love that you felt when you're a child at 7. Like it's still very much there. It still guides your life. It's beautiful to witness.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Mhm. Oh well. Um,